Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, those of you joining us in person, and we also have a nice audience online. So if I'm looking down, I'm looking at the computer here. But my name is Troy Fears. I'm Executive Director here at Candles Holocaust Museum and Education Center, and we have a busy day here at Candles, but we're very thankful to have some in-person programs today, and couldn't be more excited to have two excellent speakers with us today talking about From Terror to Terre Haute. And I'm going to briefly describe kind of what's going to happen today and what the presentation is all about. But we have Dr. Alex Core, who I know many of you know, Eva Core's son and our museum's founder. But then we also have Dr. Miriam Lowenstein Zimmerman, also from Terre Haute, right? Is that right? Yeah, I thought that, yeah, originally. Going to be talking about their parents, her father, Alex's mom, coming to Terre Haute and surviving the genocides in Romania and Germany, and what goes behind that. So we're going to have Alex speak first. We'll do some questions and answers with him, and then we'll take a little break, and then we'll have Dr. Zimmerman come up and speak as well. So a little bit about Alex. I think most of you probably know, but Alex is the son of two Holocaust survivors, Mickey and Eva. He's a full-time podiatrist for Whitnam Health Services in Lebanon, Indiana. He is on the board here at Candles, but he's also the clinical assistant professor for Marian University. So he traveled to Auschwitz over 20 times with his late mother, Eva. And so we are excited to have him here today. Anytime we get a chance to have Alex speak here at the museum, it's a special time. So at this point, I'll welcome Alex. And if you have any questions online, feel free to type them into the chat. We will be monitoring the chat throughout both people speaking. So feel free to type in your questions during the chat. Alex.
Thanks a lot. Yes, I'm Alex Core, and I recognize some familiar faces dating back to when I was in Sunday school here in Terre Haute. So I guess we have all grown up a little bit. I don't know how many of you have seen a grown man cry, but usually when I talk about my parents, there is that kind of knee-jerk response. So in case I do have a little Kleenex here, so if that happens, I'm prepared. But I am the son of Mickey and Eva Core. Obviously, as you know, both my parents are survivors of the Holocaust. My mom sadly passed away in our hotel room in Krakow, Poland, almost 3 years ago during one of our trips to Auschwitz, July 4th, 2019. And my father, unfortunately, passed away on October the 19th of this past year. We buried him on his 96th birthday, October 24th. They're both here on the east side of Terre Haute. And as probably some of you know, my father enjoyed singing along with Dean Martin, which he did almost to his dying day, and cheering for his beloved Purdue Boilermakers. My mom survived, as many of you know, 9 torture-filled months at the hands of Dr. Mengele as a subject of human medical experimentation at Auschwitz, while my father was liberated after escaping a death march by a United States Army unit under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Neff, who obviously most of you know hailed from Terre Haute, Indiana. My dad's liberation came after surviving the Riga ghetto, Riga being a major city in Latvia, and he lived almost 4 years in a number of concentration camps, including Stutthof and Buchenwald. Over the years, my parents dealt with their past in very, very different ways, as many of you know, personalities of my parents. And really, for me, growing up, never was this more evident than in 1978, when our family was asked to watch the last night of the NBC miniseries Holocaust at the local NBC affiliate down the street here on 3rd Street. And the idea was that my mom would appear on the local news that night to talk about her experiences related to the film, to the movie, related to the miniseries with my sister and my dad. And I looked on. We were in a little green room of sorts. And this would really be one of the first times that my mom was lecturing in public about her experiences. In one of the last scenes, if you've seen the movie, in one of the last scenes of the film, a little boy is kicking a soccer ball. And I looked over at my father, and I thought it was a pretty benign event. And I see, I'm 17 years old, my dad's crying hysterically. And as a 17-year-old, I had never seen my dad cry, and I didn't realize really the pain or understand why this scene triggered so much pain. So conversely, with my mom's emotions in check, she was able to tell her story during the segment on the evening news. And, I left, for me, that was kind of a turning point in my life. I left that TV studio, Channel 2, that night with my parents and my sister with kind of a new awareness that I needed to help my dad kind of deal with his past and encourage my mom to tell her story. And since that memorable experience in 1978, my mom and my dad continued on their respective paths. My mother was able to kind of continue to gradually piece her past together and developed into a speaker that even me, her harshest critic, I was very proud of her. My father, on the other hand, continued in his career as a pharmacist and kind of always preferred to have this low-key persona. He rarely wanted to discuss his ghetto and concentration camp experiences, even when my sister Rena and I, asked him to speak and open up. He didn't really understand why anyone would want to talk about such a sad story. He would often tell us, his story was like a black and white movie, but that at the end of the movie, the audience would get sick and want to leave the theater after the preview. He never realized the full impact of a story that it would have on so many people. So over a period of time, as my mother became more and more outspoken, I noticed that my dad was slightly more comfortable with the idea of talking and gradually he let his guard down. And so when my mom opened this museum in 1995, my dad had retired as a pharmacist here in town, and he reluctantly volunteered one day a week. And quite frankly, as some of you may know, a good day for my dad would be no visitors, didn't want to talk. It would allow him to listen to his favorite political program and just let him kind of be off in Netherlands and get ready for his next Purdue football and basketball game. But one day, a small class with a substitute teacher visited Candles Holocaust Museum, expecting my mom to be there and to speak. She was unavailable, and so my father gave his first lecture kind of reluctantly. And that lecture was not his last. He became a regular 1 p.m. speaker 2 days a week here. Initially, with each lecture, he would be very apprehensive about telling his story. Nevertheless, 45 minutes later, he would be in the midst of recounting his tale, and he always liked to finish with piano performance, which allowed him to show his emotion, but he always wanted to end in a positive way. And a lot of times when my dad would speak, and if I was in the audience, we had a certain deadline, I would have to come to the podium. I can remember at a event at St. Mary's, and I said, Dad, you have 20 minutes to talk. Now it's 40 minutes. I walk up to the podium. I said, Dad, he goes, you're cutting me off again. So he would tell the story a lot of times that, once he turned on the faucet of emotions, he couldn't stop. So as some of you may know, my mom's twin sister, my Aunt Miriam, passed away. Actually, tomorrow will be the anniversary, June 6th of 1993. And the pain of this loss was one of my mom's driving forces as she searched for answers to her challenging and difficult past. Months after my aunt passed away in 1993, my mom met with Dr. Hans Munch in Germany. Dr. Munch, as some of you may know, was the only Nazi doctor who had been acquitted of war crimes and then returned to practice medicine after his trial. At the rendezvous in the fall of 1993, my mom asked Dr. Munch if he would come with us to Auschwitz in January of 1995 in Poland, of course, for the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Because of revisionists who then, as well as now, deny the Holocaust, my mom wanted to have a document, as she would say, to shove in their face, to have a document signed by a Nazi to attest to these atrocities. Dr. Munch agreed to make this trip, and for the next 18 months, back here in Terre Haute, my mom tried to think of ways to thank him. She thought, my parents didn't drink alcohol, but she thought, well, maybe champagne would be appropriate. She went to the Hallmark store, which I think used to be at Meadow Shopping Center, And I believe she, people knew who she was and said, Eva, what are you looking for? And my mom didn't really have the courage to say, well, I'm looking for a card for a Nazi doctor. So nothing really seemed appropriate. So then one day, the idea came to her. As my mom would tell, a lot of her ideas came when she was washing the dishes. So she was washing the dishes, and she decided she would forgive Dr. Munch in her name only. And this is very important because even after my mom's death, people have said that she's doing this on behalf of other survivors, which she never did. But in her name only, she was going to forgive Dr. Munch for his role at Auschwitz, and that seemed like a perfect way to thank him. And initially, she realized that this was a very meaningful gift for him, Dr. Munch, but not until later did she realize that this was just as significant for her own well-being. By forgiving a Nazi in her name only, and I want to make that clear, she was lifting this burden, this chip on her shoulder for the burden of pain that had haunted her for 50 years. When I first heard of this idea as her harshest critic, I said, Mom, I don't think you understand what you're doing. And this was after my aunt's death. And in Israel, where most of the Mengele twins lived, my aunt was no longer that buffer. And so I told my mom that this is going to be not met by arousing approval. And I thought, this is not a good idea. Well, she ultimately did forgive Dr. Mengele and others, including her parents, which she hated because they didn't protect her. And so, a lot of people think the forgiveness was just about Dr. Munch or Dr. Mengele, but she really had a lot of forgiveness. She forgave herself as well. So over the years, I've learned so many valuable lessons from my parents, especially now that they're no longer here. And many of these lessons have really served me well. For my father, if any of you knew him, to be honest, I can remember years ago, we were in Washington, D.C. I was 15 or 16, and we were driving, trying to get to a monument. And I remember my dad was thirsty, so he took a glass of water while he was driving. He said, oh boy, that policeman there on the corner thought I was drinking alcohol. And he was so incredibly honest. He was always to a fault. But he believed in being honest, and he told my sister and I, you always have to be honest. And my dad was very hardworking. If any of you knew him when he was a pharmacist, he was very hardworking, was very thorough, probably thorough to a fault. People would say, oh yeah, your dad would repeat the instructions, take one tablet twice per day until I was blue in the face. But he was very hardworking. And really, third of all, which, I think sometimes I would have to encourage my mom to be, but he was very humble. My dad didn't like a lot of attention. He liked low profile, but he was very, very humble. And along with those thoughts, he would always say, it's important to say thank you and be polite. And I think, my sister and I have taken that to heart. And really, the thing that most people don't know about my dad, he was very, very tough. Never was this more evident to me than perhaps after my mom died. And his health was failing before that and then after that. And a lot of people don't realize, how tough he was. A lot of people say that my dad had the heart of a lion, but the soul of a poet. And, lessons from my mom. I think those are very important. First and foremost, I learned to never give up. Sorry. Kleenex. So in 1987, I was diagnosed with cancer. And my mom told me, because at the time, my dad thought cancer meant death. And my mom looked at me. She said, I'm a survivor. Your dad's a survivor. You'll beat cancer. Be a survivor. So, sorry. That was always very important. Number two, prevent prejudice by judging people only on their actions and the content of their character. At a young age, in 1968, after Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were both assassinated, my mother started a daycare center here at Height Community Center in Terre Haute. As some of you may know, this was predominantly an African-American community center. And as a 7-year-old, and continue really the rest of my life, my mother taught me to see past the color of someone's skin and to only pay attention to their actions, their character, and their heart. Number three, which most of you know, forgive your worst enemy, will heal your soul and set you free. And although this is still very debated, I contend that my mom's decision to forgive not only saved her life, but allowed so many other people to come here to Candles and to learn about forgiveness. And it also allows people that really have no connection to World War II to deal with adverse situations, hopefully in a positive way. The fourth lesson I've always learned about my mom, from my mom, is give your parents an extra hug and kiss your children for those young children who had no parents. And obviously I did that a lot. Number 5, each of us has an important part to play in repairing our world. Tikkun olam, be the change that you wish to see. Change happens when people take action. Do not be a bystander. So unfortunately, Holocaust survivors unfortunately becoming a casualty of time. Each day the world loses another Holocaust survivor. Each day we as a society lose another witness to this terrible atrocity. Each day I feel a greater obligation to continue my mom and my dad's work and to tell their story and to give both my parents a voice with them no longer being here. So 2 nights before my mom passed away, July 2nd, 2019, we were in our hotel room, and I think we had didn't have much going on. And I said, Mom, I was working and she was watching TV, and I said, Mom, you're getting a little older. Maybe it's time for you to slow down a little bit. She responded, what do you mean slow down? What are you talking about? I have a lot of work to do. My job is not done yet. And so, I think about that last conversation with my mother every day. And during that last week of her life, my mother actually had finalized remarks that she wanted to deliver during the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which would have been 7 months later in January of 2020. And she was pretty much obligated, and she wanted to deliver those remarks. And in fact, Stephen Smith from the Holocaust USC Shoah Foundation and Michael Birnbaum both helped my mom with those remarks. And unfortunately, as you know, she never had that opportunity to give that one last and very important speech. So today, during this ceremony, what I would like to do is to emphasize my mom's hope that her life lessons and legacy will live forever. I would like to read a portion of that speech. And it's a long speech, but I've kind of highlighted what I think is important. So I'm going to speak as if I'm my mom. I'm here today. This would have been January 27th, 2020. I'm here today to declare that we still have much work to do. Much of the world around us is in turmoil with hate crimes and anti-Semitic violence at a level not seen since World War II. It is in part due to the current world situation that my active responsibility to share my memories in an effort to educate the world, with the hope that this education will keep another Auschwitz from happening, feels more urgent than ever. There is nothing that I can do to change my past, but I can change my future and hopefully that of others. Saying never again is not enough. We must act with definite purpose and a common goal for the sake of ourselves and others. It is up to us to actively teach today's world, especially our youth, why respect and common decency for everyone, regardless of race, religion, or any other difference, is so important. And until we use that education to begin to heal our words, heal our open wounds on the most basic level, and allow ourselves, the former prisoners, to be free of the pain of our tragic past, we will never be truly free. It is my opinion that by being free of the pain, survivors ensure their eternal peace and fortify their abilities to reach out and educate others with their memories. In my life, again speaking on behalf of my mother, in my life I have met with survivors and perpetrators, as well as their children and grandchildren, and new generations of hundreds of German-born children who all share something. That something is guilt. For some, this guilt was because of the memories of their own actions. For others, this guilt is because of the knowledge and memories of the actions of individuals who they did not know. Nothing positive has developed in them because of this guilt, but yet the human interactions with generations of Germans long removed from the Holocaust have been for me incredibly powerful and positive. I leave you with this one question. How do we use our memories today to change the course of events for future generations living long past our own mortalities? We all have the power within us, which we can use to answer this question for the betterment of humanity. My power from within is forgiveness as a way to heal and empower myself. I suggest that we all have the power to forgive those who have wronged us, not for the benefit of them, but because of all of us finally deserve to live free in a way that allows us to share our memories without reliving the unbearable and agonizing pain of our past with every spoken word or shared memory. By doing so, we challenge any perpetrator, possible perpetrator, or denier of today or the future by empowering ourselves and others with the undeniable and unforgettable truth of what happened here each and every day. Our memories will provide the necessary fuel to light the way to hope, healing, understanding, goodwill, and peace for humanity. Like our vivid memories, the horrible crimes against us and millions of others can never be washed away or forgotten. But how we deal with those memories is our choice. Let there be a new beginning, which includes hope for mankind, and let it begin with us. So here in Terre Haute today, as a son of 2 Holocaust survivors, we obviously all solemnly remember all victims of the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, 1.5 million of which were children, as well as 5 million non-Jews, including dwarfs, homosexuals, and gypsies, who all lost their lives. May their memory be a blessing to us all. However, as my mother proclaimed, we must also use the memories that come from these painful experiences to make the world better now and for future generations. But when I hear that, talking as Alex Cora, this sounds like a daunting task. Make the world better. How can I do that? And more importantly, how can you do that? So as you know, over the years, my mother gave hundreds, if not thousands, of speeches. Having heard a handful of these over the years, here are some other simple and very straightforward recommendations that everyone can try, young and old. Number 1, think of one thing that you can do every day to make the world a better place. This sounds simple, and it is. My mom would have urged you to pick up garbage if you see it on the ground. She would ask at a school to befriend those others in the cafeteria that maybe are eating alone, and to definitely stand up to bullying. Number 2, be the best you can be. As a high school or college student, or somebody who is my age or older, as you prepare for whatever your next challenge is, you can only do your best. Be the best self you can be, day in and day out, no matter what. Number 3, I want my time on this earth to count for something. Do not just exist. Leave an impact, a positive impact on others. Number 4, I have the human right to be happy and free from my tragic past. Everyone deserves to live a happy life, free from the effects of trauma. Number 5, my memories are the source of my strength and the motivation for my actions. Forgiving is not the same as forgetting. Memories can fuel positive actions. Number 6, make yourself feel good by being kind. We all know that kindness has been shown to improve self-esteem, empathy, and compassion, and improve mood. Number 7, prejudice is a cancer of the human soul. Number 8, getting even never healed a single person. Number 9, anger is a seed for war. Forgiveness is a seed for peace. And number 10, forgiveness is really nothing more than an act of self-healing and self-empowerment. She called it a miracle of modern medicine. It is free, it works, and has no side effects. As my mom often said, if you don't like the way it feels, you can take it back and be angry again. In 1966, during a visit to South Africa, Robert F. Kennedy, who was one of my mom's idols, said, each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy, and daring those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. My mother shared a very similar philosophy and would often use Kennedy's ripple effect, especially when talking to kids. Even children as young as 5 or 6 or 7 years old were positively affected by my mom's frequent analogy. She would tell them, if I throw a pebble in a lake, there's a ripple. If 2 children throw 2 pebbles in a lake, there's 2 ripples. If 100 children throw 100 pebbles in a lake, there will be a wave. And there is ripple touching ripple. I hope my words today will be the first pebble in that symbolic lake, creating a ripple that will reach your ripple, and that together we can create a wave that continues the work of my mom and my dad and other survivors like them, helping the world remember the lessons that they desperately want us to learn, understand, and put into practice. So there's a film, obviously, 2018, EVA A-7063. Hopefully you've seen it, done by Ted Green Films and WFYI, EVA A-7063. At the end of the movie, while we look into the heavens, my mom is speaking to her mother. She said, Mom, I would tell your story. I hope you're proud of me. So today, I echo the same words. Mom, I would tell your story. I hope you're proud of me. Thank you very much. You want me to take questions now? I can take questions now between the Kleenex. So if anybody has questions, I can. We have a couple online. And if you have questions, I'll say them over to the people. Oh, easy audience, good. I like easy audiences. I can tell jokes too. I have a lot of jokes that my mom used to tell, and my dad.
One question we have online, because the doctor was acquitted, did that make it easier for her to come forward with her first forgiveness?
Wow, I don't think I've ever heard that question before. Because Dr. Munch was acquitted, did that make it easier for my mom to forgive him? I would say so, yes, probably. I never thought about that. Obviously, she did not know him or have contact with him during her time at Auschwitz, but knowing that he was cleared of these charges, I think it probably did allow her to reconcile and forgive him. And, you know, as I said, and as my mom would have said many times, she was mainly doing it initially. This was not some formulaic idea. She was mainly doing it as a gesture to him. And she obviously didn't realize or understand the importance of what it was doing for herself. That's a good question. Whoever asked it, it's very good. Another question, Troy, for somebody here? Oh, good, I can tell jokes. Is there another? No other questions? Nobody has questions about my Sunday school experiences? Yes.
Did you keep in contact with the Munch family after the 1995 encounter with him?
So my mom kept in touch with Dr. Munch, and then he passed away 4 or 5 years later, I want to say. And then my mom was good friends with the daughter, who lives in Canada. And so after my mom died, I got a message from the daughter, and I've sent her a couple. So here and there, I keep in contact with the daughter. The granddaughter, who was also with us during that trip, I think is in Western Canada. But and then the son was a physician in Germany. But to some extent, yes. I mean, I still once a year I'll get a message from the daughter, who lives in Eastern Canada somewhere in, I think, Montreal, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, kept in touch. No other questions? So let me tell a couple jokes here. So right before the pandemic, do we have time? Yeah. So right before the pandemic, I was asked to speak at the Carmel Clay Library, and it was the next day the world stopped. And so Ted Green and I were supposed to speak in front of a group at the Carmel Clay Library. And I told Ted early in the day, I said, there's nobody going to be there. There'll be nobody there. So I get there about 20 minutes ahead of time, and all of a sudden there's like 15 people there. I have nothing prepared, nothing, zero, had nothing prepared. So by the time we start, there's 100 people in the room. So Ted comes in with a document he's reading. So I'm scribbling on a piece of Kleenex. So I thought, I'm going to lighten up the mood. So I came up with these stories. They're all funny stories. So one of the great stories, and my mom, you all know, would be on Twitter. So she still has an active Twitter account, but and she liked to be on Twitter. And initially, the Twitter account was created by somebody here at Candles, and she didn't know how to work, a computer. Well, she learned how to use an iPhone. And I remember, must have been 7, 8 years ago, one day she tweets something, and the person in charge, he said, "Did you tweet that?" I said, "No." He said, "Oh, I think your mom knows how to use Twitter." So it was a political statement, which we didn't want my mom making political statements. So from that point on, I got on Twitter because I had to screen all her tweets. So 2018, I drove home to see my dad, and my mom was at the museum on a Saturday. It had snowed, and my mom told me earlier, "I'm going to get my car washed, and then I'll be at home." So I'm watching a Purdue basketball game with my dad in a bar in Terre Haute. And so my mom calls me about 4:15. I know she would leave the museum at 4 and usually go to get groceries. I go, "What's wrong?" She goes, "Well, I'm stuck in a car wash." I go, "Are you wet?" "No, I'm not wet." She goes, "I got to get my car washed and nobody's here and I'm stuck." I said, "Okay, where are you?" 25th and Holman. So I said, "Dad, I'll be back." It was halftime. So I drive to 25th and Holman, and I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do? So I called the owner. Somehow I got in touch with somebody at their other car wash that meet me there. So I get there and I put my credit card in and I get into her. She's in the car. She goes, "I just want my car washed." I go, "Mom, let's get you in the car out of here safely." Okay, whatever. So finally the guy opens up and we get out, and she wants to take a picture with the guy before the car wash. So I take a picture and I'm like, okay, why? So she gets the car wash, another picture. So I said, okay, fine, car wash. I go back to see my dad. So she's driving home. Beagle County Sheriff calls her. "Eva, are you okay?" "Well, why? I'm fine." Well, when she was stuck in the car wash, she took a picture of herself. "I'm stuck in this car wash, 25th and Holman." They got over 99 calls to 911 here. And so from that point on, I no longer had concerns. I knew if she got into trouble, she could tweet something and she would be fine and dandy. And one other quick story. So you all know that my mom was friends with Ed Asner. And the way the story, after the book Surviving the Angel of Death was done, a couple years later, she gets this phone call, and I'm living on the East Coast. And she said, "Well, I talked to this guy on the phone. He's talking fast and he wants to make the book into a movie." And then at the end of the conversation, he says, "Well, you need to call my friend. You probably know him." And so my mom says, "Well, who's that?" "Well, it's Ed Asner." And my mom said, "Yeah, and I'm Mary Tyler Moore." So my mom tells me the story, and I said, "Well, Mom, there's no way it's Ed Asner." So a couple of nights later, she calls him, and it was Ed Yitzhak Asner, born in Kansas City, very religious Jewish upbringing. So my mom was starting to have hip problems, which I can relate with now, but my mom started to have hip problems, and Ed was an expert on hips because he had 7 hip surgeries. No medical degree, but he knew his stuff. So anyway, my mom and my mom and Ed Asner became friends, and my mom sent him the book. And several months later, she was out in California with some friends trying to see if there was anything going to happen. And I would lose track of my mom all the time. Like, she would fly to California and then come back that night and spend the night here in Terre Haute and then fly to Minnesota. I said, "Mom, don't call me at work unless it's an emergency." So she calls me one day in the middle of the day. She goes, "Are you busy?" I go, "What's wrong?" "Oh, nothing's wrong. I'm here with Ed." I go, "Ed who?" She goes, "Ed Asner. He wants to talk to you." I go, "Okay." I said, "Mom, well, he wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay. How you doing, Mr. Asner?" "Oh, don't call me that. It's Ed." I said, "Okay." I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "Well, you're a foot doctor, right?" I said, "Yeah, He goes, "Well, I want a foot doctor, in my group. So make sure you put my number in." I go, "Okay, I'll put your number in." He goes, "Well, here's my home number, is my cell number." So he goes, I need a foot doctor. Maybe you'll come out here and look at my feet sometime." So my mom continued to have hip problems, and they would talk. And then months later, it got bad. She had hip surgery. And I didn't know that she was telling him everything. And so it was February the following year. And so my mom has a surgery. My sister is with her in recovery room. Everything's fine. She texts me. I'm working a basketball game. So I get a text. So I text a couple of people and I accidentally text Ed Asner. So next thing you know, 30 seconds, the phone rings, or it's Ed Asner's cell. I go, hello. He goes, who the heck is this? I go, it's Alex Core. Who the heck are you? I said, I'm Eva Corson. Oh, yeah. The hip surgery was today. I said, yeah. He goes, how's she doing? I said, she's fine. Oh, she'll be fine. When are you going to come in or look at my feet? So that's all my good stories. Any other questions? Yeah, I did. So about a year or two later, I was playing a tennis tournament in California, and he was listening, and I was in Palm Springs, and he lives in Studio City, and so he called me, yeah, come on over. I have a family reunion. I hate most of my family, but you can pick me up and you can be a good distraction. So I picked him up and was a distraction, and it worked out well. There was one other question.
Have you found that you have been able to forgive as your mom did, or with both of your parents having suffered at the hand of them, is there still a little part of you that wants to say, go down Nazis?
So there's a lot of ways I can answer that. So I get that question a lot. You know, I think forgiveness is a very important trait that we all should learn. I can remember, and I'm going to try to answer your question. I can remember being 10 years old playing, I think Nelson was on his team. We played for United Hebrew Congregation. We thought we were going to be the next Jewish Michael Jordans basketball. And I remember where I was, we were in a car, and none of us were, maybe we were 12 years old. And I remember somebody said, well, when I get a car, I'm definitely not going to buy a German car. And I said, well, why wouldn't you buy a German car? Well, they said, Alex, if anybody wouldn't buy a German car, it would be you. And I said, well, wait a second. If we're going to hold people against, you know, if we're going to learn anything from my parents' past, we should learn that we should not, you know, prejudge somebody based upon the country they're from or the country where the car is made from. I said, I'll buy the best car I want. It has to be a German car, fine. And I always remember that because that was years and years before forgiveness even came into my life. But I thought that was really interesting. I think I was 12 or 13. And so I don't think I can forgive on behalf of my parents. I do think forgiveness is important. I think it's done so many wonderful things for so many people. But if somebody says, could you forgive Dr. Mengele's son? You know, I'm still kind of dealing with that. I don't know that I have that power to forgive. I do think, and just so you know, my dad eventually did come around because we talked about forgiveness. There was a constant chatter at the dinner table or when I'd come home. You know, my dad eventually, years later, he did like a little publicity. And I remember his favorite basketball player was Dirk Nowitzki. Dirk Nowitzki is of German descent. So I can't remember when it was probably 2010 or 11. My dad decides, he calls me, he goes, I'm going to have a press conference. I go, what? What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to forgive Dirk Nowitzki. I go, you don't know Dirk Nowitzki? He goes, well, his grandparents could be Nazis. I said, well, that's possible. So we had a big press conference right here, and my dad forgave Dirk Nowitzki's parents. To my dad's dying day, he had a jersey of Dirk Nowitzki in his room. So he did come around, and even right before, so it would have been January 2020, there was a trial of a Stuttgart guard, a guard from Stuttgart, the concentration camp, that did not know my dad, but they wanted to know if anybody that was at Stutthof would forgive this gentleman. And my dad gave a statement that was read in court in Germany, and he was of sound mind and body. And he said, I've learned a lot from my wife. I would forgive this gentleman if I met him. So I think, you know, from that standpoint, I think forgiveness is a very valuable skill, and I think more people need to use it. I think when it comes to my parents, I'm not sure that I have the power, the right, or to forgive Mengele's son, let's say. But I wouldn't harbor any ill will. Yes?
What challenges did you have growing up as a child of Holocaust survivor?
How much time we got? Well, challenges growing up, for those of you on Zoom or whatever, challenges me growing up in Terre Haute. There were a lot of challenges. I mean, the biggest challenge, if you saw the movie, was that when we lived near Thornton Elementary School in 5th grade, so which would have been 1974 or 5, I come home from a PTA meeting with my mom, and there's swastikas on her house, go home dirty Jew. And this isn't that long ago, it's 50 years ago or so. And that was a challenge because here I am, 10, 11 years old. These are my, fellow students, classmates. And here my mom the next day, is chasing these kids around. And it was it was very, very difficult for me. My sister less to an extent, but for me, that was probably the first time that I can recall having to deal with this past. And around that same time, you know, you would have swim events or Friday night parties. And I remember being at the YMCA downtown, and I was getting out of the pool late. 2 kids beat me up because I was Jewish, and I remember their names still. And so I think the fact growing up in Terre Haute to 2 Holocaust survivors, my first language here was not English, it was Hebrew, which a lot of my friends still say it's not my mother tongue, but I argue with them. But so for me to go to Israel, I always felt more comfortable there a lot of times. But here, you know, I got so used to being in this city, knowing that I was in the minority, I got used to that too. So it was a challenge, and probably, you know, like anything, when you're 12, 13, 14, I was Woodrow Wilson playing tennis, and I was very embarrassed by my parents, very, very embarrassed. And I think that was a challenge. I think most kids at that age are embarrassed. But for me, it was much more embarrassing because I would always have to like tell my mom, you can't say that, you can't do that. And sometimes even my dad, I was playing tennis against Cam Cameron, who's a great athlete here, and he wasn't a great tennis player, I was. And I'm up 6-0, 3-0, and my dad yells out, "You're hooking my son," which means cheating. And I got so embarrassed, I almost lost the match, but I beat him. So Cam, you're watching, I still like you. So, but the point is, it wasn't easy. I think, you know, at one point I always wondered, why didn't my parents move to Skokie or, you know, somewhere where there are more Jewish people? But on the other hand, I think I learned about diversity, and I learned to fit in, and I learned how to deal with other cultures and other religions. So I think, you know, you can kind of have the glass full, half empty. And for me, I chose to make it half full. So there were a lot of challenges. So I don't know if I answered your question, but hopefully I did. Any other questions?
Why did your parents come to Terre Haute instead of someplace else?
So I'll try to make that a Cliff Notes version answer. My father was rescued by American GI Lieutenant Colonel Neff from Terre Haute. So my dad came here to finish high school at lab school, ended up going to Indiana State, then Purdue. So Terre Haute kind of became a second home. He wasn't going to go back to Europe. One brother was in Israel, one brother was in Connecticut. So finished college. My mom and my aunt, as you know, went to Israel. And so there was no internet dating at the time. So my mom went to visit, my dad went to visit his brother Shlomo, met my mom on a blind date. And they weren't going to live in Israel because my dad had a good job here. So my mom got out of the Israeli army. And so my mom went from Transylvania to Tel Aviv to Terre Haute. So that's how she came to Terre Haute. But yeah, I think, you know, I think my dad's story is even as interesting or more interesting than my mom's for a number of reasons. Any other? Yes.
Why did that one doctor get acquitted?
So Dr. Munch, Hans Munch, he refused to do selections at Auschwitz. Selections meant you decide who lives and who dies. I don't know how he was able to refuse to do that. His first set of subjects, you can look it up on Google. His first set of subjects were having to be Jewish doctors from all over Europe. So he went around the room and introduced himself. And the Jewish doctors were saying, my goodness, he's treating us like a person, not a number. So he had dialogue with them, and they said, look, if he was doing experiments on them, and they said, as soon as the experiments are done, they'll kill us. So he made up fictitious experiments to keep these 20-some, 30-some doctors alive. At the end of the war, he gave one of his gun to a doctor from Connecticut, Louis Michaelis, Michaelis. And at the end of the war, he fled. Dr. Munch fled because he was a Nazi. He was put in jail. When his trial came up, the 20-some Jewish doctors that he helped free kept testifying on his behalf. So he was, if you go to Israel, Yad Vashem, there's a hill of the righteous Gentiles, Schindler. You have one for Hans Munch too, a memorial there for Munch. So Munch went back to Germany and practiced medicine. There is a movie at the end of his life. He became senile, and there is a movie, The Last Days, produced by Spielberg. And in the middle of the movie, they interview him, and for a couple months, they thought he was on war crimes. This is right before he died. And at the very end of his life, they found out that what he testified in this movie was incorrect and false. So bottom line is, he saved Jews, similar to Schindler, and that's why he was allowed to continue to practice. One of his Jewish friends, when he got to Auschwitz, he pulled him out of the line to the gas chamber. So he had a lot of Jewish friends growing up in his hometown. Yes.
why did your mother stop pursuing Mengele? Why did she decide, whatever she decided, it wasn't worth it?
It's a great question. One of the reasons was I kept on telling her, Mom, you're wasting your time. The question is, why did my mom stop pursuing Mengele? We would get phone calls from people all over the world. I remember it was crazy. People would call, my mom would say, well, I'm in Las Vegas and there's a guy playing the piano. We think it's Mengele. It's a true story. I mean, I said, Mom, this is getting ridiculous. So finally, I think one of the things that, she didn't have focus. And then when my aunt died, I think that gave her a new focus. And she turned a negative, into a positive. And I think the late 80s, early 90s, she just lacked focus. And unfortunately, when Donna Mary, my aunt, died, that really kind of put her mind to the point that she decided she wanted to do something in my aunt's memory. One is to create this building and this museum, and then beyond that, to forgive. So I think that was really, a terrible loss of my aunt, kind of shocked her back into reality that chasing Mengele around the world wasn't going to do it. I think we're up against the clock. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for those online.
All right, thank you, Alex. We are going to take a quick break, a 10-minute break. It is 2:30 right now. And for those of you on Zoom, we are going to turn the camera off, keep recording, but we will start back here at 2:40. And for those of you in person, we do have some lemonade and iced tea and some cookies, snacks out front. So we'll take a quick 10-minute break and we'll be going again. Thank you. We are very excited to have Dr. Miriam Lowenstein Zimmerman with us today. She was born and raised in Terre Haute, was a graduate of Wiley High School here in Terre Haute. She is a professor, or was a professor of communication in a Catholic university for 35 years. She taught 25 years a Holocaust class at Notre Dame de Namur University. Did I say that right? I don't know. In Belmont, California. She studied the Holocaust at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as well. She just returned from 3 weeks in Germany, and she attended the Obermanningen Passion Play. I'm sure I said that wrong as well. But she writes for the National Jewish Post and Opinion, and has been doing that since 1985. So we are more than happy and can't thank her enough for coming today to talk about her father, which you should see that on the screen. Dr. Werner Lowenstein. So I welcome Dr. Zimmerman. So come on up. And the same thing with Dr. Zimmerman as we did with Dr. Kaur. If you have any questions online, feel free to type them in, and we will throw them out to her as we're going along.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Troy, very much. That was very nice. And I feel like I've stacked the audience. I see a lot of familiar faces. Let me ask, how many are from Terre Haute, were born in Terre Haute? And how many graduated from Wiley High School? How many graduated from Wiley High School in the class of 1963? So welcome. Trent will, I don't see on Zoom. Oh, I do see it on Zoom. Okay, we're all set. I just want to tell Alex personally, as you know, I attended the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz with your mom. And I also attended the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz when you took over for your mom. And I just want to say, Alex did a fabulous job. He stood in all the places where she stood, gave her speeches, gave her story. And I think she would be very proud of you. So when I was there with the 50th, just so you know, Eva had a wonderful sense of humor like my dad. And she had just had the surgery. She had, Miriam had already passed away, her twin, and she had given her kidney to Miriam several years earlier. So I said, Eva, what was that like to give your kidney to your sister? And she said, well, Miriam, to tell you the truth, the kidney worked better for Miriam than it did for me. So she was an amazing woman. So I want this to be conversational. I have some stories. By the way, this picture is actually from Eva. She had a photojournalist that came to her house to take pictures of her, and she wanted Werner, my dad, they were good friends, also to be photographed. So this is one that stayed with the family. Now, I hope this is going to go next. Okay, so Dad was a German Jewish refugee. He came over in 1937. He would never say he was a survivor because to him, a survivor was someone who had been in a camp, and he had not been in a camp. He got out before he would have been rounded up. And he came over as a refugee, $5 in his pocket. And this is where he's from, near, actually, this is what I want. This is the Netherlands. This is North Rhine-Westphalia. And that is where he was from. So you can see it a little bit better. I wanted you to see the proximity of Boer and Germany to Ukraine, since Ukraine is in the news, and since I have a daughter and her family who live in Munich, and there are several countries away. So this is what my dad looked like in Germany growing up. His brother was my Uncle Kurt. I will call him Uncle Kurt because that's how I called him. The picture on the right is probably of their mother, my Oma, which means grandmother, and Kurt was older, so he would be on the left and Dad would be on the right. This is the two as young men, and they were so close. I don't have any pictures of them from Germany by themselves. They were always together in the pictures. So they look very dapper to me, even though that's a vintage picture, and it looks like they had a lot of fun. And they did. Dad told me he liked growing up in Germany very much. The man circled on the right with his group of businessmen friends was my Opa, their dad, David Lowenstein. And this is more pictures of my grandfather. And they had a business on the main street of their little town. And they were very successful. The top right picture is both my Oma and my Opa. And I would ask my students, looking at this picture, what kind of Jews were these? Were they Orthodox Jews? Were they Reformed Jews? Were they in between? What do you think? Anybody? Yeah, the men and women are together cavorting on a beach. That wouldn't have happened if they were Orthodox Jews. So this was a very liberal Jewish family living in Germany. So this is a picture of the store on the street. The main street is no longer the main street. Dad took us back in the 1980s, took my sister and me back. He wanted to show us his roots, and he wanted to pray over the graves of his grandparents. So, but this is what the store looked like back then. The sign, the translation on the side of the building, oops, it's gonna, sorry, I'll master this yet. This translation, Katzenstein and Company was the name of the store, which was my grandmother's maiden name. And why it was Katzenstein and not Lowenstein, we don't know. But the translation on the side of the building says, white woolen goods, trimmings, men and children's hats, ladies' finery. And Dad always said it was a dry goods store. I would translate that to be accessories. It wasn't your Mies or your Alden's or your Roots, if you remember those stores, or Macy's today. So this was Dad's gymnasium, which is essentially a high school, but in Germany, a gymnasium is also the equivalent of 2 years of community college. It was for university-bound students. At the time that my dad went there, it was called the Hindenburg Gymnasium. Well, Hindenburg was the president of Germany, and he enabled Hitler to come to power. He granted him the dictatorial powers by signing the Enabling Act. So he was in bad favor at the end of the war, and everything that was named after Hindenburg was changed. So today it's the Max Planck Gymnasium, and it's still a functioning high school. Now, when I went there in the 1980s, I was very resentful because my high school, Wiley, had been condemned. And my dad pointed out in Germany, they build things to last. And that was one of the things that I liked about Germany. The two people in this picture, that's my cousin Michael, and he's the oldest son of Uncle Kurt, and he's standing with his daughter, Leah. Both of them are Lowensteins. I think they might be on Zoom. Hi, Michael, if you are. And we went back in 2018 for a Stolperstein ceremony. So one of the values, one of my dad's, actually both parents' legacies was education. Education, education, education. Dad was a 1934 graduate of the University of Berlin Medical School. And that was the last year that allowed Jews to graduate. So after that, he couldn't get a license to practice medicine in Germany, even though he was a graduate of medical school. So his diploma told him he had to leave Germany. The left document is his high school Reifert. Sister Carol, can you pronounce that word? Reifert-Zeugnis. And that's his certificate of leaving the high school. And on that, he declared he was going to go to medical school. I like to put those two certificates next to each other. This is a certificate of the Iron Cross, and it was given to my opa, my grandfather, because my grandfather was a World War I veteran, war veteran. And he was given a certificate, a medal. He was a medal earner for combat service. And the key issue here, if you look at his certificate, it's dated 1935. And that date is significant because it's 2 years after Hitler came to power. And my opa thought because he was an award, a combat veteran from World War I, even though he was Jewish, he would be protected. The Nuremberg laws had already been passed. There was always already discrimination, but he was being given a certificate of merit. So his certificate told him to stay in Germany, and my father's certificate told him to leave. Ultimately, after Kristallnacht, when the store was destroyed by Nazi thugs, my grandfather realized he had to leave. So he did, thanks to my dad's help, but not without a lot of procrastination. My dad told me that he got visa after visa for his father, only to have them expire, because you have to go through the Nazi bureaucracy and the United States bureaucracy, and you have to get steamer tickets, and all your ducks have to be in a row. Finally, he left. My grandparents left in 1941. This was 2 years after the war had begun. I do not know what happened to them between 1939 and 1941, but they left from Portugal, which was neutral, and they were on the last boat to leave continental Europe after the war broke out. And after that, the Nazi U-boats sealed the continent, and no ships got in or out Germany, off the continent. We're leaving Germany now. Do you have any questions? So far, so good. So Dad landed in America on April 15th, 1937. He had $5 in his pocket, and he was on a luxury liner called the SS Manhattan. And ironically, when he went back after he became a soldier, he wanted to fight the Nazis. He enlisted. The boat was transformed into the USS Wakefield, and it was the same ocean liner. He made a round trip in the same steamship. And this is a picture of him in his uniform. So Dad was a German-speaking doctor. He was in a medical unit that went right behind the advancing lines as they went through Germany. And do you remember the old MASH TV show where the medics break camp and then they advance with the soldiers as the soldiers advance? Well, my dad was in that kind of a medical unit. They did everything that the MASH units did on TV, but they didn't do surgery. And in fact, the one time I think my dad got into trouble, I should add that because he was a German-speaking doctor, he was also put in charge of captured, wounded German prisoners of war. And he could talk to them as a doctor, so that's why he was put in charge of them. He found a soldier who needed his leg amputated. So he amputated on the spot. He got the necessary equipment from the kitchen, and the soldier lived. And he got a reprimand for that. And I saw the reprimand, but my dad told me when I asked him about it, he said, well, the soldier had been abandoned for 3 days and gangrene had set in. And if he hadn't operated on the spot, he would have died. So he saved the life of the German soldier. As part of an advance unit, he went into the concentration camp of Buchenwald the day after it was liberated by the Americans. And as you heard, Mickey, Alex's father was also in Buchenwald, but the two men did not meet at that point. Dad said that the people were so far gone that nobody could save them from death, and they died by the hundreds, day after day after day, even though they were liberated, and even though the American army tried to make as much available as was needed. So Dad told me that liberating Buchenwald scarred him for life. And as such, they talk about in Holocaust circles about not only survivor guilt, but liberator guilt. So Dad had both survivor guilt and liberator guilt, which was a double whammy of guilt. So how did he get to Terre Haute? Well, he was helped by the Jewish authorities in New York. They got him a job as an orderly in a hospital, and they told him that even though you are a doctor, be content with your job as an orderly because we have enough Jewish doctors here. This was from the Jewish authorities who were helping him. Well, Dad told me he didn't go to all those years of schooling to be an orderly. And so with very little English language skills, he found a Catholic hospital in Lafayette, Indiana, that needed a resident intern. Now, if you graduate from a foreign medical school, and this is true today, even if you've been an intern, you have to repeat your internship and residency. So he had to repeat that here, and he found a residency at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Lafayette, Indiana. Ironically, my first husband is from Lafayette, Indiana. And we found out at our wedding that my dad and his uncle actually double dated a couple of times when Dad was living in Lafayette. So it's a small world. By the way, my first husband is still my husband. So after his year at St. E's, he didn't have a place to go, and the sisters had another hospital in St. Anthony's that needed a doctor, and so he relocated to Terre Haute. And I can't drive by what is it, 6th and College, 6th and College, and it's still a vacant lot where St. Anthony's used to be. Without shedding, I need a little Kleenex. Thank you, Alex. But that's where he was for many, many years. And by the way, he was on the board when St. Anthony's became regional hospital. He was the only one on the board that voted against the sisters selling to a for-profit concern. And after that happened, the doctors all complained. They didn't like the way things were being run at regional hospital. Just for example, patients were turned away, and they would never have been turned away under the sisters. By the way, the Franciscan order, some of the old timers spoke German because it was an order of nuns from Germany. And my father had done an externship at the Catholic Hospital of Cologne, and he had a letter of recommendation in German from the Mother Superior. And so perhaps that helped him get his original placement at St. Elizabeth's. Oh, by the way, when he came to Terre Haute, some members of the Jewish community met with him and said, you know, you don't really want to stay here. We already have a Jewish doctor here. And that Jewish doctor was Norm Silverman. May he also rest in peace. His son Jay graduated in our class, and his wife Sylvia Zooms with some of us Wednesdays with Jackie. And they became very good friends and colleagues. And now there are a lot of Jewish doctors here, I understand. So people want to know, how did Werner and Hazel meet? Well, Hazel, my mother was Hazel Anderson from Utah. She was born and reared a Mormon in Springville, Utah. She graduated from Brigham Young University and got a master's degree at New York University. And so she found a job at, I think it was ISTC, Indiana State Teachers College, which would become ISU, Indiana State University subsequently. So she was teaching there. My dad was starting a medical practice, and neither of them could afford a new car at the beginning of their careers. So they each bought a used car, and apparently they bought it from the same man. And he thought that two such highly educated people should meet, since there weren't so many of them in Terre Haute at that time. So he fixed them up and they started dating, and they indeed got married on June 4th in Provo, Utah. And notice that was yesterday. So today or yesterday would have been their 80th wedding anniversary. And there's a funny story about her and Dad's wedding at the faculty club of Brigham Young University. I found out at Mother's Mormon funeral. She had a Jewish funeral here and a Mormon funeral in Springville, Utah. And I found out from cousin Larnell that it was the only Jewish ceremony ever held on campus. And the reason why was the rabbi insisted on having wine. It's part of the ritual, and the couple sips wine during the ceremony, and they had to have wine. Well, can you imagine trying to find wine in 1940s Utah? Well, there was none to be found. My grandmother Anderson put up chokeberry juice, fermented chokeberry juice, for medicinal purposes only. And so mother asked the rabbi, would that be okay? And he said, well, it would have to do. So that's what they did. And it created such a scandal that no Jewish weddings have been held there since. So mother used to go on and say that oh, by the way, they didn't have a rabbi in Utah. He was an itinerant rabbi. He served 5 or 6 Western states. And so he would make a loop from one state to the other. So they had to schedule their ceremony when it was convenient for the rabbi, when he was going to be in Utah. So he came in and he conducted the ceremony. And at the appropriate time, he took a swig of wine, what he thought might be Mogan David, right? Which is very sweet. Well, apparently chokeberry juice is as tart as the name implies, and his look of horror, mother would describe, and then he spewed this juice all over the bridal couple. So that was the start of their wedding. Mother did convert, by the way, to Judaism before the wedding. So medicine was very important in our family. Education, education, education. My brother actually graduated from Indiana University Medical School, and so did his son Scott. I believe Scott was still in medical school when the picture was taken in the middle. And my brother Paul has since retired as a plastic surgeon. Scott also is a plastic surgeon. The picture on the right does not have Paul, so I'm sure it was taken before 1950, which is when Paul was born. My sister Ruth is 2.5 years older, so she's on the left. So these are some pictures, family pictures. Picture on the left is Zimmerman's with Lowenstein's on Ohio Street. My mother is holding my baby Leah, and Josh is in the middle on my dad's lap, and Rebecca is by herself. And then my brother and his wife are on the far right, and my sister Ruth is in the middle, and my husband and I are on the left. And every year at Christmas time, my dad would be on call for his Christian colleagues, because that way they could celebrate the holiday with their families. And he would always dress up as Santa Claus and go to the pediatric ward and give the children candy on Christmas Eve. And he's seen here in his Santa Claus costume with Minnie Walter. She's the mother of Gloria Alga, who also graduated in our class. Growing up, they owned a little, very little cabin on a lake, and we did a lot of water sports. Bottom right is my daughter Rebecca when she was about 2, and Dad and me, we took her swimming. So some of his favorite things: he jogged. He was a medal winner. He qualified to go to Puerto Rico for some regional Olympics. He used to tell me about ageism before I became aged. And he said, you know, it's really not fair, because when he's in a race, they would have a category 50 and older. And he was running when he was 60s and in his 70s. And he said, it's really not fair. The top left, he and I ran in 2 Beta Breakers races. I live in a suburb of San Francisco, and that's always a yearly event. They came to a conference in San Francisco one time, and the left pictures with me and my parents. The middle picture is with Benny Coe. Dr. Benny Coe was a radiologist here in Terre Haute for many years, and he was adopted by my dad. And then he told me that our dad made him or got him to quit smoking, and they ran a lot of races together as well. And the top right picture, I want to pause because, oh, you can't see it. Can I? Well, how can I? I'm afraid to touch it. The top right is Sister Carol Nolan, and Sister Carol is with us today. She's from St. Mary's. She, thank you. Thank you, that's perfect. She ran a recorder group and got Renaissance attire.
It looks good here.
So Dad is dressed in full Renaissance regalia, as is Sister Carol and Violet Carol. Sister Carol, would you like to say anything?
Besides the fact that Werner is one of my dear friends, and I would never ever in my life, I've been hard to think of anybody I love for. He was very humble about this, and Violet used to get out him sometimes. Besides him,
Can I take the microphone to her? Oh, never mind. Okay. So thank you for that. Yes, they were very dear friends. And the bottom right, Dad went with my brother and my brother's oldest, Andy, on December 6, 1987. That must have been right before he was diagnosed with his cancer, because he died in 1990, and they were protesting Soviet Jews. That picture is taken on the Washington Mall. Okay, now we've jinxed it. I can't advance. So. So one of the legacies,
The last one?
that's the last one. I
okay,
think that's the next one.
the next one.
Yeah, that's the next one.
Okay.
So do I do it by here now?
No, I think we're okay.
We're okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think we're good.
So I just want to say, I don't know why that did that.
It's all right.
Okay. So Dad, health, humor, and kindness. It was a lot of fun growing up in my parents' household. By the way, they were very patriotic, and Dad actually built a flagpole outside our front door on Ohio Boulevard. And every morning he would raise the flag, and every evening he would lower the flag. This was the greatest country in the world. And like Alex, diversity was something he embraced. He and Mother were members of NAACP, that's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which was probably the only national organization for, we call them African Americans or Blacks now, but in those days they were Negroes, colored people. And I once went out with someone at college, and I happened to mention that, and he said, "Your parents are communists." And I said, "What do you mean?" "They belong to NAACP." And I said, "Yes, that's a communist organization." And I said, no, it's not. So I did not experience any prejudice growing up in Terre Haute, unlike Alex. That this was in the 50s and 60s. I'm a bit older than Alex, and there just wasn't any prejudice. And so I went to college thinking that anti-Semitism only happened in Europe. It didn't happen in this country. Of course, I was quickly disabused of that notion once I went to college, and I found out that Jews were underlined and Blacks were circled in the admissions records and office. So they had a quota for Blacks and Jews where I went to school. So at Dad's 1990 funeral. How am I doing on time? I'm doing fine. Okay. So at Dad's 1990 funeral, Mother told all three of her adult children, I don't want to be buried here. I don't want to be buried here, through her tears. And she said, I want to go back to Utah. I want to be buried in the mountains, under the mountains. So she died 6 years later, and we decided to honor her wishes. So we called our Mormon cousins, and they were only too happy to oblige. And it was a matter of how do we transport the body from Indiana to Utah? Well, have your funeral hall people call our funeral hall people, and all the professionals took care of the logistics. And they were very respectful of our needs. They wanted to know if we had any special needs. So we asked for three things. We asked that it be a closed casket, because in Jewish tradition, you don't look on the deceased. It's disrespectful to look on the deceased. And we asked for there to be enough dirt that we could cover the casket at the burial site. And we wanted to say the special Kaddish prayer at the burial site. So when we got to the funeral home in Springville, her hometown, we were a bit disappointed. We saw the open casket from a distance, but my cousin said, here, you can sit here. You don't have to look in the casket. And they don't have professional priests in the Mormon tradition, but they have lay leaders, and he did a wonderful job talking about the family and so on. And then he did a very nice thing, and I guess I need a Kleenex, Alex, because I haven't told this story. He had them close the casket, and then he invited the Jewish family to be up there to say a prayer and hold hands with our Mormon cousins. And some of them are probably on Zoom. So hi, Sharon. Hi, George, Laurenelle, if you're there. And that was just a beautiful moment for me, because Mother did her best to create a Jewish home growing up. Her mantra was, you know, when people would ask her, how could you convert away from Mormonism? It's so strong. And she'd say, well, God doesn't care if you're a Mormon or a Catholic or Protestant or Jew or Muslim, as long as you're a good Muslim or a good Protestant or a good Catholic. That's what God cares about. So I thought everybody believed that. And I went off to college thinking, oh, you know, that's great. I thought everybody believed that. I didn't know that it was my way or the highway for most religions, but that was a legacy from her. So health as a legacy of my dad. He used to give lectures to young people. He loved to do this. He took pictures of his patients in wheelchairs, and they'd be drooling and they'd be strapped in or just in very, very debilitated conditions. And it got their attention because he would say, your old age depends on the life decisions you make today. So diet, exercise, no salt, no smoking, all the usual things was his mantra. And hopefully he influenced them. I know he influenced me and our family. Oh, by the way, I've been to Mother's resting place several times, and it's really beautiful. The mountains are all around, and it is beautiful. So another legacy, how could the Holocaust have happened? And he would say three things when people asked them. He gave a Cliff Notes version. He said that it wasn't well known, but the Nazis had a racist ideology that called for extermination of whole peoples. It was based on the bogus science of eugenics, and I see there's a display right over here about eugenics. And they had a propaganda machinery that convinced the people that this is the way it was. You had to exterminate the gangrenous limbs of the people. And then they had doctors to carry it out. So that was like the cornerstone of my Holocaust class: racism, propaganda, medical murder, beginning with the T4 euthanasia program. My dad would say doctors were complicit at every step of the way. Every doctor during the Third Reich was guilty of genocide. Thank you very much, sister. Thank you. So, if you do want a text on this, I recommend Racial Hygiene, Medicine Under the Nazis by Robert Proctor. It's not the most recent, but it's really the most comprehensive. Dr. Proctor has since written a book called The Nazi War on Cancer, and the Nazis knew about the link between smoking and cancer in the 1930s. It took our Surgeon General until the 1960s to get it on our cigarette packets that cigarette smoking may cause cancer. So any questions about my family life? And we'll have more time for questions. You might think some of them later. Yes.
Yeah, you just mentioned about the dad having gone to March on Salem, which I think was a rather important part of his life in
Okay.
1965. So
Yeah.
I think the rest.
Okay, he did. He went, he was not with Martin Luther King, and it was a smaller march in Alabama, and he would make sure we understood it wasn't in Selma, but he did, no, it wasn't Selma, it was a different small town, but he did go. He went with a contingent of nuns and priests from St. Anthony's. It was all organized through the religious orders of St. Anthony's, and they went and they marched in support of Black rights, voting rights. So that, yes, that was an important part. So this was a picture, I think it was at Terre Haute's, the Jewish community's sesquicentennial celebration. And Eva, by the way, when I grew up, she was Eva. I noticed a lot of the candles, people call her Ava, but she, my father called her, my parents called her Eva. I called her Eva. I don't know, when did she become Ava?
She never did.
She never did? Okay. Well, anyway, so I don't want to cause a little war here, but so here's Eva with my brother and my sister and me, and we had a good time. So, so this one, Alex, I'm now talking about our connection with the core family. By the way, Alex talked about his cancer, and Eva told me that when Alex was in college, he came home on a Memorial Day weekend, and Dad examined him and called up Eva, and he said, Eva, I think Alex has a very rare form of cancer. He needs more tests. But Alex had to go back to college, and fortunately, Alex, you followed through, and so you've been a cancer survivor for how many years?
35. Yeah, 35.
35.
It was June 17th, 87.
87.
Yeah.
So this picture of Alex with Shlomo, I met Shlomo at the 90th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Okay, I'll read what she says. And now I need to move my picture again. But dear Miriam and Richard, thank you for the lovely evening dinner with Rena. And she met my daughters. And then she sent me these pictures in her email. This is Cousin's statement with pictures of Alex and the Maccabea Games. Alex won the medal in mixed doubles over 40. No one has written about him. Well, I have to, Eva knew me as a writer by this time, and I'd written numerous articles about her, including the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and the 75th. And I never did write about that, Alex. So maybe I'll write about this and I'll make up for it. I think Eva was trying to plant a seed that I should write about it. Can you tell us about this? Was it in Israel? Where was this
So
tournament?
these are the World Maccabea Games. Actually, I'm going in 5 weeks again to compete.
Oh.
And Shlomo Glickstein mentioned there was number 20th in the world in the late 80s. And he lived next door to my Aunt Miriam in Israel. So I had met him when he played on the professional tour. And that picture is right after we lost to Shlomo in the finals. That's why. So I've won bronze and I've won silver. So I'm hoping to win gold. And the girl in the middle was my mixed doubles partner. And she played at Pepperdine, which she was a very good player. So
Very good.
and Shlomo Rada was a family friend who my mom met on a trip to Israel, and they became fast friends. I'm not sure he's still alive.
But he was with us for the 50th.
Yes.
Because that's where I met him.
Right.
Okay, well, I have some more that she sent me. So that's you with your partner, your mixed doubles?
I need these pictures. I haven't seen them.
I'll
Yeah,
email
that's me
them.
with Marianne, and the picture to the right with me circled to my right is my uncle Shlomo, and then behind him are my 3 cousins. The gentleman behind me is Avshalom Kor, who's kind of the Ted Koppel or Walter Cronkite of Israel. In fact, when he came to the match, people said, "Oh, you're here to watch Shlomo Glickstein because Shlomo was a national hero." And he said, "No, I'm here to see my cousin."
Are you serious about not having those pictures?
I don't have those.
Okay.
I haven't seen them. I don't have them.
Okay. So Dad was on the original Candles board, and he was also on her panel in November of 1985. Eva convened a panel on the death of Mengele because she didn't believe that the body in Brazil that was dug up recently was really Mengele. So she had this inquest with the forensics pathologist who examined the bones. Dr. Michael Baden was here, David Marwell was here, and my father discovered the Osteolitis Connection, and I'll just briefly say what that is because he did a lot of research on it. And you have to understand the history of medicine. Mengele lived in a time before antibiotics, and today osteomyelitis would be easily cured with antibiotics. But back then, just to make the diagnosis would have resulted in the scarring of the bones. So there was no evidence of osteolitis in these bones. So people would ask my dad, well, does that mean the bones from Brazil weren't those of Mengele? And my dad's answer was very nuanced. And since there are a lot of academics here, I'd like to give you his exact response. He would not say yes or no because it was not a yes or no question. He would say, if the documentary evidence is correct, and Mengele had osteomyelitis as a teenager, and if the forensics evidence is correct, that there was no evidence of osteomyelitis in the bones, then the cadaver that was exhumed and buried in 1979 in Brazil under the name of Mengele could not be those of Joseph Mengele. So this documents my father's role in identifying osteomyelitis. So there was a recent book by David Marwell, and he mentions osteomyelitis, but he doesn't mention my dad. My dad was also very humble. As Sister Carol mentioned, he wouldn't care that he was not mentioned in this book, but for some reason I care. And I arranged a Zoom with him in between my 3 weeks in Germany and coming to Terre Haute. And between one thing or another, it was too hectic, and we decided to reschedule the Zoom. But I just wanted to ask him why he didn't give credit to my dad since he was there. Yeah, Alex.
So, I've been on a Zoom with David Marlowe, and he contends that those bones had no evidence of osteomyelitis. And I told him the same story you just told him. And he said, no, that's wrong. So if you do have a conversation with him, you need to, because he had hematologous osteomyelitis of the femur. It's a bloodborne infection, and it would have definitely, like your dad said, shown up on those bones.
Okay, yeah. And the younger doctors that were involved in the examination of the forensics team, they were all young doctors. I mean, young in their 40s, 50s, pre-antibiotics. They didn't know that it wasn't easily cured in those days. So, okay, I'll let you know the outcome of that. So, let's see. Do you have any questions? Any questions? Yes.
Could you explain further what you meant when you said your dad went to DC to protest Russian Jews?
Oh, Soviet Jewry. Yeah, Russian Jews. Prior to 1990, the Russian Jews were not allowed to leave Russia. And they were repressed, discriminated against, so on and so forth. And many of them wanted to leave, but they were not allowed to leave. And so there was a movement in the Jewish community here to try to get them freed. And apparently my brother was active, and he brought my father to a demonstration in Washington, D.C. on behalf of Soviet Jewry. Subsequently, it has a nice ending. After the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1990, the Soviet Jews were able to leave Russia. Good question. Any more questions online?
There is one more. And it was from earlier. I apologize. It says, is it possible that the store was called Craxton Steam because the original founders or owners were your grandmother's family and not the grandfather?
That's a possibility. My grandfather and my grandmother came from two different little towns in Germany. And so it's hard to think that that would have happened, because her family stayed in Obderode, which is now part of Meissen in Germany. And so I don't know. I just don't know. It's possible, but I don't know. Good idea. I don't know how to track that down. So in 2018, years later, our family was honored with 4 Stolpersteine in Germany. And Stolpersteine are little sculpture pieces that are put in the sidewalk in front of the last house that Holocaust victims lived in before they fled or before they were deported. And it's a volunteer organization. It's the vision of an artist. And his vision is, you know, we live in a world without Jews in Germany, but this house and that house and that house used to have Jews, and people don't know that. So by creating these little mini works of art, little sculpture pieces, putting them in the sidewalk, people will walk along and it'll be uneven and they'll metaphorically stumble and they'll look down and see the names of the victims. So in 2018, 18 of us, Lowensteins or related to Lowensteins, met in Boer and for the ceremony. I told the volunteer who documented our family's eligibility for these stones to tell me a restaurant where my father might have gone. So he said they probably would have gone to the Schloss Berge, which is a picture in the middle. You can see my dad and Uncle Kurt. My dad is on the right. And the bottom right, we're having dinner in the restaurant in that former Schloss, which means castle. And on the left is my husband with my 2 Munich granddaughters, so I had to get them in there. But they did attend the ceremony. And the top right is some of them. They came from all over the United States and Holland. So here's the artist inserting these stones, and I was allowed to talk. And a little interesting story about being liberal Jews. The volunteers said that when they have the stumbling stones inserted in the sidewalk, the local Chabad rabbi, which is an Orthodox organization, brings a minyan, which means 10 men, that enables Jews to say a public prayer. Women don't count in a minyan in Orthodox Judaism. So I thought about it and I said, you know, I called him up after I was in Germany and I said, our family were Reform Jews, we're liberal Jews. All of our daughters and granddaughters of Kurt and Werner had bat mitzvahs. Women count in minyans in our family. So there are 17 of us. 2 were my granddaughters, so they don't count, they're too young. But we have a minyan without the Chabad rabbi, so you tell him he's not needed. So I think the volunteer, his name is Andreas Jordan. He was really very, very nice. He said, well, he said, the rabbi will be displeased, but it's up to the family. So we had our own minyan. And here's what they look like. They were for David Löwenstein, Bertha Löwenstein, Kurt Löwenstein, and Werner Löwenstein. And that's the German pronunciation, if I got it right. It's traditional to put a stone on a tombstone. So that's what they look like. So here we are in front of the building. It's now, as I mentioned earlier, the Salon, Charisma Hair Salon. And I'm so glad it wasn't a Subway or a McDonald's, which are all over Germany. And it's a private beauty salon. So my granddaughters are front and center, and they are the great, great granddaughters of David and Bertha Lowenstein. So that's what it looks like from across the street. And somebody held up a postcard of the Katzenstein store, and that's what it would have looked like, same building. And as I say, I have a daughter who lives in Germany. All of my 3 adult children and I have become German citizens, and 4 out of 6 of my grandchildren have become German citizens. Both the United States and Germany recognize dual citizenship. And this is a picture of Leia, my youngest, when we went to the German consulate to pick up her birth certificate or naturalization papers, and I'm holding my German passport. There were 5 of us, or 4 of us at the ceremony who were German citizens. So we took a picture of the Stolpersteine, and my daughter doesn't travel with her passport since she lives in Germany, so she put her California driver's license on it. And people ask me, and this will be my last story, how would your dad feel about having a granddaughter living in Germany? And I said, well, you know, when he took us back to Germany in 1980, one night I told him, I said, Dad, I'm having a problem. And of course he was instantly concerned, what's wrong, what's wrong? And I said, well, no, nothing, but my problem is I like Germany. And I said, I'm not afraid to walk with Ruthie alone at night on the streets. The restrooms on the Autobahn are so clean, and your high school is standing and my high school isn't standing. I like Germany. And I grew up in a household where all things German were verboten. We couldn't even have Bayer aspirin, but that was before I knew that Bayer conducted experiments in the concentration camps. So he said, well, you know, I liked Germany too when I was growing up. So we had a long conversation, And I really believe that he made all kinds of distinctions, sort of what you were saying. You don't carry it from one generation to next. Forgiveness was not part of the vocabulary. He said the people we see around us, none of them they're too young to have been involved in this. And today, every town, every city has a Holocaust memorial, and even the little villages. We went around to the little villages where our ancestors were from, have memorials to the Holocaust and to the victims of the Holocaust. So that, plus in the 1970s, Dad got his German license to practice medicine. And there was an ad in the Aufbau placed by the Chicago German consulate saying if anybody was denied a professional license in Germany at that time and has documentation to prove it, you can submit it and you will get your license. Well, Dad had all the documentation he needed. So after a few months, his German license to practice medicine came in the mail. And when we were in Germany in 1980, in the 1980s with my sister got sick one night. So he went to the Apotheke, which is the pharmacy, and he was surprised that the medicine he wanted required a medical license. So he whipped out his German license, and one time he used it in Germany for his own child. And by the way, pharmacy, he always recommended to his patients to use Mickey as their pharmacist. So they had a close relationship. So are there any questions? Yes.
I'm just curious, why was it important to you to have a dual citizenship?
Okay, so when people would ask him, why did you bother to get your German license? He would say, I worked for it, I earned it, it was mine by right, and they took it away from me. They wouldn't give it to me.
Passports.
And it's the same reason. It's ours by right. We're German Jews, and they wouldn't let us have it, and I want it. And there's a little childish piece of me that is delighted that my daughter is living in Munich, and with all modern transportation and communication, it's not like she's half a world away. It's like, Neener, Neener, you didn't get us all. And we're back. So those kinds of things. Alex.
Do you recall, because I don't know the answer, how did your father meet my mom?
I know how he felt. I'm sure it was through Temple or something. I'm sure it was through Temple. But I remember I was at Woodrow Wilson, and he came to me one night and he said, Miriam, you'll never guess who settled in our town. And I couldn't guess. And he said, Eva Kor, she's a Mengele twin. And I had no clue who Mengele was. I was in junior high school. And so then he said, well, she was experimented on by the Nazis during World War II. And he proceeded to give me my first lecture in Nazi medicine and Nazi experimentation in the concentration camps. So I think that's probably it. I do know that they did some programming, or they were on programs together, interviewed together. I think, yeah, a lot. They were on TV programs together. So may I end with Dad's SS joke, and I will promise I will sit down. So as someone in charge of wounded SS officers in World War II in Germany, whenever he encountered a wounded SS officer, and he said, not the average soldier, but these SS officers, you had to prove Aryan descent for 5 generations to be in the SS. This was very important to them, their blood purity. Whenever he had a wounded SS officer who needed blood, he would say to them, I'm sorry, wir haben nur Blut von Schwarzen oder Juden. We have blood only from blacks or Jews. You know what every SS officer who needed blood said? Das macht nichts. It doesn't matter. They knew it was bogus. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much, both of you, Alex and Miriam. Your parents were incredible people, and it's great to be able to share their stories and to hear their stories today. So, for those of you in person and online, we are recording this, and we will have that recording up on our website here in the next couple of days. So give us a couple of days for that. But I know Alex and Miriam will still be around for those of you in person who'd like to ask any questions. And we thank all of you from across the world watching today, and both in person and online. So thank you and have a great afternoon. Thank you.